Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Dark Art Society podcast. My name's Chet. I'm your host. Today, we have an interview that I was so excited to do, a guest that I was so excited to get on, Mitch Horowitz, who is an occult scholar, a great writer, and a just a kind of a brilliant guy. And I've been into his reading his books lately, into his writings, watching his lectures on YouTube. Mitch is a great writer. He's got a really good book out right now called Daydream Believer. Um, he's written a bunch of books. Occult America is really good. The Miracle Club's really good. Um, those are the ones I've read. But get Daydream Believer, check it out. It's really great if you're interested in mind manifestation and stuff like that. So yeah, really excited to have him on. We had a really excellent conversation. I was a little nervous I was going to screw up because he's a smart dude and I'm kind of a dummy. So I I don't think I made too much of a fool of myself. uh, but really great conversation. Super fun, super fun. Loved it, and I think you'll enjoy it too. So that's coming up. I What have I been doing? I've been painting for the Zombie Deathbots show. Still one piece available. Everything else pre-sold, which is pretty amazing. And but there is one piece which is ironically my favorite painting from the whole show, I think. My favorite character hasn't sold yet. So there's one piece available. You can contact Copro Gallery if you want, if you're interested, if you want to buy it. You can check that stuff out on my Patreon too. Patreon.com/Chet Zar. If you want to support this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/Dark Art Society. And if you join you can join for as little as $1, support the podcast, get your name read on the show. And if you join at the $5 level, you will get entered into a drawing to win a free skull from our sponsor, the Skull Shop. That's SKULLSHOPPE.com. Here's one of their skulls now. If you're watching on YouTube, check it out. It's a great skull. It looks totally real. Their skulls are amazing. Anyway, Kyle's a great guy. It's his shop. It's his skull shop. He does amazing work. And join in at the $5 level at patreon.com/Dark Art Society and get entered to win a skull every month. So let's see, new subscriber. Hold on one second here. New subscriber this month or this week. Sorry, Joe Risotto. Thank you, Joe. You're making it happen. You're keeping the podcast going. Couldn't do it without you subscribers. Is there anything else? Not really. Nothing comes to mind. Oh, we have a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is developing and happening. I started posting podcast, our Dark Art Society podcast on this channel at the beginning of the year, and I've sort of been lagging on it and posting once a month. But it kind of dawned on me the other day, I've got 200 episodes that are audio only that I just need to convert into videos to post them on YouTube. I mean, most of the stuff I listen to is on YouTube, so I assume a lot of other people get their podcasts from YouTube. So I'm in the process of converting those old episodes to video, even though there's no image to speak of. There's no image of us talking like the new episodes are. But so those are dropping like daily. So just search Dark Art Society podcast on YouTube and please subscribe and like the videos and watch the videos or have them play in the background, because I'm trying to get to a point where I can monetize that channel, and I have to get 1,000 subscribers on there. I've only got 280 right now, and we need 4,000 hours of watch time, and there's only like 700 hours of watch time right now. You need that in a year space to monetize the channel. Anyway, that will help the whole Dark Art Society podcast and everything we're trying to do here. We can get more money coming in from it. All right, so that's it. Let's get to the good part. And that is my interview with Mitch Horowitz. I think you're really going to enjoy it. What a cool guy. Okay, here we go. My interview with Mitch Horowitz. Hope you enjoy it.
Good to be here, man.
I'm so excited to have you on. Oh my God. This is too fun.
I'm happy to be here. And you're in your studio?
Yeah, yep. This is my painting studio. It's the
beautiful.
Oh, thanks. Yes, I was working on this guy during the last Daydream Believer seminar.
Brilliant.
Yeah. It's for me, it was so fun listening to that. I liked it that there was not a lot of audience participation and I could just kind of listen, because what I love to do is my favorite thing to do, which is paint and then listen to things like this. It's like it's a way for me to get in that headspace and totally get into what you're saying while I'm doing my favorite thing. So it was like just so enjoyable. I just loved it so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And one of the things for me when I'm giving a presentation, whether it's live or digital, is I very rarely use graphics during the presentation, because I really want to feel, I want there to be a kind of extemporaneous back and forth with the listeners. And also when you're doing the old PowerPoint or what have you during presentations, it weds you to a certain script, and there's a place for that. But for me, I really enjoy the extemporaneous connection with the participants.
Yeah, that's what I was on day one. I was not sure how it was going to be, and so when I realized it was just going to be you talking, I was like, "Oh, this is great! I can keep painting."
Oh, that's excellent. That's great.
Yeah, so I'll do an intro. I'll record an intro to kind of give people your background and stuff. But I mean, I don't want to get too caught up on that, because you've done it so many times. You've said it a million times on a million podcasts,
right?
As far as like what you do. But you're an occult scholar and a writer and a lecturer, and there's a million YouTube videos of you out there. So for people listening who aren't familiar with Mitch's work, definitely check him out. But I first I think I discovered you on Jason's podcast, Jason Louv's podcast.
Yes.
And I kept hearing so many things that were so similar to my own life. I was like, I gotta get this guy on the podcast. This is too much, from the first off, anybody talking mind metaphysics that's a punk rock guy is like, that's a given for me. That's like cool. That's my jam.
Excellent.
It's like I'm a punk. I like, I'm a huge Dead Kennedys fan. I grew up on this stuff. And my kind of, I got into magic around the same time I got into punk rock, and it's like it completely changed who I was, or maybe a more fully realized version of myself around this time. So I've always connected punk and magic are very similar to me, because I was discovering them at the same time in a way. And yes. And I was always, and it always kind of made me feel like an outsider in the spiritual community in that way, because there's no punks in there. It's all like white light folks, and it's like and hippies and stuff. It's like, where's the punks? Punk seems to be totally in line with magic to me. It makes perfect sense. The independence and the DIY thing. It's like, that's magic.
Exactly. And you mentioned Jason Louv, and one of the reasons I dig Jason is because his search, I hope like my own, is very married to lifestyle, and as is punk. And I people always ask me what for me is the personal connection between punk and magic, or punk and the occult. And I've never been entirely sure, but I remember at age 16 or maybe 17, being in my bedroom, smoking weed, lonely, staring in a mirror, and then on came Holiday in Cambodia. I must have been listening to a college radio station or something. And I tell you, a lot of people have that aha moment where they discover some work of expression and it just changes everything for them. And for me, that moment was an instant change, and I've never forgotten it. And it was a kind of alchemy. And
Mm-hmm.
so I always ask myself, all right, look, all of us in life, we have all these problems, we have these needs, we have relationships, we have things that we want to express. Are there accelerants? Are there things that will help get us there? And for me, just hearing the Kennedys come over the radio helped get me someplace. It opened me up to a channel of communication that I just didn't know was there. Up to that moment, I was listening to the Steve Miller Band, and
Right.
no aspersion on Steve Miller. I love
Yeah.
him, but
Yep.
there was a hunger that was unmet. And when I heard the Kennedys at that young age, that hunger was met, and I know it was I experienced something nourishing, and I wanted more of it. And so for me, the occult is the same thing. It's the individual not necessarily having to be married to a congregational approach or wanting to carry a membership card, or depending upon a person's search, even dedicating him or herself to a series of rituals or liturgy. There's an anarchic quality to
Mm-hmm.
it, and it's a quality that really seeks to get you someplace. So I've been very into this idea from a young age right up until today of searching for accelerants. And punk has
Mm-hmm.
been that, and the occult has been that.
Yeah, I I felt like it seemed like punk was so anti authority
Mm-hmm.
and anti-religion that
Mm-hmm.
they ended up kind of generally are more like humanist, atheistic. It seems like as a whole, there's not a lot of magical thinkers in punk rock,
Yes. Right. Right.
and the closest thing I ever was able to find was uh, a book about a Buddhist punk rocker
Mm-hmm.
that
I
was
know that book. Yeah.
oh, okay, yeah, and that was cool, and I was like, that to me was like, the first thing I'd found, and because I like, again, I always felt like the oddball, but I mean, isn't that the whole point of punk
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
magic really is the
Right.
outsider status.
You
um
know, apropos of that, you do run into a lot of people, not only within punk communities, but within communities of political dissent or social dissent, however one defines it, that are very materialist. The spiritual
right.
search, the extra physical search is not really part of their lives. And one of the things I write about in this upcoming book, Uncertain Places, is that there doesn't have to be this divorce, this chasm between occultism and political dissent. I think that modernist culture, maybe because religion for so many centuries in its traditional form had been a source of regression, modernist culture really drew down a very sharp line of demarcation between religion and radical social change. So you'll find that in Marx, you'll find that in Freud, you find that in almost all the philosophers that grew out of that milieu. And I've never felt it was necessary, because the central principle of modernist philosophy, it seems to me, is that there are unseen antecedents toward what we experience in life. So if you're a Marxist, that's economic cycles that result in some inevitable clash or revolution. If you're a Freudian, that might be trauma or sexual repression.
Mhm.
And even if you get into the so-called hard sciences, for Einstein, that becomes time and relativity. For Louis Pasteur, that's germs and microbes. For William James, it's a personality conditioning. But the whole modernist idea is that there are these unseen but knowable antecedents to events that we experience. And the occult philosophy, it seems to me, is in harmony with that, because it's the belief in an unseen dimension of life whose influences can be felt on us, can be felt through us, the extra physical. So the search for the extra physical, it seems to me, doesn't need to be detached from any of these other
Right.
areas, whatever one's approach is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just weird how the, generally speaking, the new age metaphysical scene is dominated by more like hippie types, which is
Yeah.
fine, but that was one thing that uh bugged me, it always kind of bugged me. It's like, this is supposed to be about a personal search, and it shouldn't have a uniform in a way. You
Yes,
know what I
right,
mean?
right. And it's amazing how beliefs can become their own uniform. And you
Right.
meet people within the alternative spiritual culture who perceive themselves as outsiders, and yet they cannot slam shut the door quickly enough when somebody comes in with a set of ideas, non-invasive, non-coercive ideas that they don't like.
Right.
So, for example, over the past several years of my search, I've been really interested in my own esoteric conception of Satanism as a ethical, spiritual, self-developmental path. And I will not infrequently encounter people on the New Age who might consider themselves witches or astrologers or belong to some strand of mysticism, and they want to slam shut the door. And even though I take pains to explain what my outlook is, what my philosophy is. It's the romanticism, it's the Satanism of the romantics, the
Right.
romantic poets who saw the figure of Satan as a not quite metaphorical force for rebellion, for usurpation, for radical individuality. And yet some of these same people will rush to slam shut the door, even though they've had the experience of having the door slammed shut, which is why they're on the alternative spiritual scene. But it's human nature, and
Yeah.
and we all do it. We all do it. I have to watch for examples in myself of that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's something we always have to, I think, kind of fight against, or at least be aware of when we're doing it.
Yeah.
And that's definitely one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because you have gotten me interested in your view of Satanism has made me more open to accepting it. It's like I've always had a squeamishness just about the
Mm-hmm.
name.
Yeah.
It's like I'm pretty sure I read the Satanic Bible. It's been so long. I'm
Right. It's kind of a
99%
requisite, so we all pass through it
yeah,
at some
right.
point. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And but over the years, I've read I don't know, the 9 satanic statements and these things like this, and I've always been like, that makes sense. That makes sense. I don't really agree with that one, but this makes sense. This makes sense. It's like there's like always like 2 or 3 that I'm not quite in line with. And so I feel like that and my own conditioning has kept me has made me not fully accepting of the idea that it's a legitimate spiritual path.
Mm-hmm.
But hearing you speak about it, that's the thing that tripped me out when I heard you talking about it on Jason's podcast,
Mm-hmm.
was
Mm-hmm.
that it's like exactly like what I'm doing in art. That's how I feel. Because what I do is we call it dark art. It's what everybody calls it. And it's monsters, it's macabre stuff, it's creepy stuff. And because I love that stuff. I just love it. It makes me feel good. Aesthetically. There's something about it. And I've been that way since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And there was a point where I was starting my art career. Again, another parallel between us. It's like I had a successful career in the special effects makeup industry, in the film
Right.
industry, for like 15 years. And I decided, this used to be my dream job, and now it's not anymore. And what my dream is, and the thing I used to dream about in the first grade, was being an artist, a fine artist, a painter. And so I decided, at age 30, that I was going to start teaching myself how to paint. And then, like, by the time I was 40, early 40s, I quit the day job to do
Mm-hmm.
fine art.
Mm.
But anyway, point being, when I went to go and sit down and paint, and I realized that I want to paint monsters. What would be the most real thing I could paint? Because I came out of this commercialized art directed type of job for movies, where
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
designed by committee, and
Mm.
make your creature 13% less scary. And
Right. Right.
I've gotten notes like that before.
I believe it.
So I was like, okay, I want it to be real and pure,
Mm-hmm.
pure
Yeah.
expression, because it's the
Yeah.
opposite of what I've been dealing with in the
Mm-hmm.
film industry. And I had to admit to myself, I want to paint monster stuff. I want to paint stuff that is not taken seriously. There's no market for it. But I feel like, if I'm going to follow the Joseph Campbell, follow your bliss theory,
Right.
it'll work out for me because this is my true passion.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I started painting these monsters, and I almost felt some guilt about it in the beginning. And the thing that brings me back to your interview with Jason, where he's like, were you ever kind of scared when you decided you were going to go down the satanic path? And you were like, I just you made some a comment that was something like, I was going to go all the way. I committed to going all the way. And I
Yeah.
did. I had that moment with my art. I was like, I feel kind of guilty. Is this putting badness out in the world? It's not, because my mom was like a new age person, so I have
Mm-hmm.
that kind
Mm-hmm.
of positive baggage on me, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. But I was like, I have to do it. I'm going to
Yes.
take it all the way. And so that just resonated with me because, your decision sounds similar to the decision I made with my artwork.
Yeah, I think that's true. I really think that's true. And I made a decision to dive into the deep end of the pool because that's where the big fish are, and I want to discover things. And I have to admit, it was not a tough decision. It wasn't something that I wrestled with. Um, I'm always careful because the term Satan or Satanism is so fraught.
Right.
I'm always careful to define that I believe there is an esoteric backstory to the satanic in the West that we all have not fully understood. I believe that the Romantic poets, William Blake, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, and others, Lord Byron most especially, they grasped the satanic as a force, an energetic force, if I can put it that way, within the human story, and not quite metaphysical, not quite metaphorical force, not quite metaphorical force. I mean, these were people who were very interested in probing the extra-physical, as I am, and that it was a force, as I alluded earlier, of rebellion, usurpation, radical individualism, non-coercive, non-invasive, not the violent kind of colloquialism that has gotten draped over that term. And I've also had people I love who have said to me, look, I dig everything that you're saying. I understand everything that you're about, but must you use that term? Because we as a society, we as a human community in the West are never going to get past that term.
Right.
And, I think they're right. I always say this story is unfinished. I've embraced terms that some people eschew, like New Age or occult itself or ESP. I don't believe in putting a bow tie on something and dandying it up and saying, see, it's not ESP anymore. Now it's called psi.
Right.
See, it's not channeling anymore. And now it's called intuitive. See, it's not esoteric. It's not occult. It's esoteric. I mean, we always keep sort of changing the bed linen, hoping that this will prove more acceptable. And I've never believed in doing that because I do think certain terms have historical integrity. And I come from the Abrahamic tradition, that being Judaism, Christianity, Islam. I had an Orthodox Jewish bar mitzvah. I grew up in a household that was very traditionally Jewish. I have heard the terms Azazel and Shaitan or Satan announced in synagogue, literally. And I always felt that there was an esoteric backstory, and one doesn't have to go hugely beyond scripture, which I just see as a parable of the human story, as all enduring expressions are, to find that. And I mean, my source material, I start with Genesis 3, the snake in the garden. And I grew up as a little kid, in a synagogue, hearing the name of the demonic Azazel announced during Yom Kippur, and it was not negative. It was a moral neutral. This was a force that existed in the world with which the Hebrews had a relationship. They might have been a little scared. They might have thought, we're not going to have this guy over every single night, but there are times where we are going to interact with this figure. And it was a moral neutral. It was a fact of life. It was part of the forces that they dealt with in the world. And coming from that tradition, as many of us do in the West, I felt that that term had historical grounding and integrity, and it figured into my search.
Hmm.
And so when I embarked on this path, I gave a public talk very, very early on, which I titled Satanism, the Dark Alternative.
That's great. I've
And
seen it.
yeah, oh, thank you.
I love it.
And thank you. And I purposely, and I must say, very effortlessly used that term. And so we scheduled the talk and everything was fine and everybody was happy. And then I was told by the venue organizers that there was somebody at this particular venue who was a very well-loved astrologer who said she was going to quit the place and walk if I gave that talk. And I said, then we'll have to deal with that, because I won't change the title, not because I'm being obstinate or not because I am interested in provocation as an end to itself, but because that's my search in private, and my public and my private search are the same, or I become a politician, and life and search, work, life, search, they're all one whole. So I elected to embark on that, making every effort to be understood, knowing that sometimes it would be misunderstood.
Right. Yeah, I feel like in a sense, I've skirted around that truth in a way, because if based on your definition from what I've heard of Satanism and what I know about it, it's like, this is satanic art.
Yes.
It's
beautiful. It's
thanks.
dark in the sense that the womb is dark.
Right.
This is the soil is dark. The cosmos are dark.
This is, I've said this a million times on the podcast, because this is the point of the podcast, really is about, ultimately it's it was started to kind of promote dark art, because I feel like it's legitimate art. It's real. It's really, really amazing. I think it's so good. I think it's super prescient to what's going on in the world today. It's like, it's ticks all the boxes. And so, but we're kind of a marginalized group, especially in the art world, not taken seriously at all. So
wow, I'm surprised to hear that after all these years.
Well,
wow.
Even Giger, it's like, you don't see any Giger shows at the MoCA, or I'm talking about the blue chip contemporary art world. It's just not.
Got you.
We're like illustrative. We're too illustrative for them. We're using low subject matter, like comic books and horror comic books and things, like for inspiration and horror movies. But my idea is like, those things inspired us, and at least, and this is at least speaking for me, and I know it's a lot true for a lot of other dark artists. We're trying to elevate these things that we love and put them in a new context as fine art, because they mean that much to us. Like Tales from the Crypt comics, they meant something to me, and they still do.
Absolutely.
They're so cool. So it's like, these aren't low forms of art.
It's genius.
Right.
It's funny. One of my favorite artists is the recently deceased comic illustrator Steve Ditko. I love Ditko, and I'm a huge Ditko fan. And I remember vividly when I was a kid collecting comics, my friends and I, first of all, did not like Ditko when I was a kid, because we thought, these are stick figures. This is childish looking. We like John Byrne and the more realist comic artists. That's just because that's what we were raised on. And it was only later into adulthood that I revisited Ditko, and I came to love him and realize the magic in his work. And it's amazing for a man who was an ardently dedicated materialist and objectivist, certainly towards later in life, a deep acolyte of Ayn Rand. Who else but Ditko could illustrate the cosmic so beautifully and so well, not only in Doctor Strange, but in many of his horror comics? And Ditko had trouble getting along with people. He didn't dig the machine. And so he wound up leaving Marvel Comics, going off on his own. And in the late 60s and 70s, he's writing and illustrating for Charlton Comics, which was considered to be a very backwater shop located in Connecticut, considered to have poor printing standards and so forth. And all that was true, but there was no editorial oversight. So Ditko could just run wild and do whatever he wanted, and nobody bothered him. And he loved it. He was happy. But in comic fandom, when I was growing up, people didn't collect Charlton comics. They regarded Charlton as sort of joke books, and they wanted the more serious stuff from Frank Miller and other artists, all of which was wonderful. But now Ditko's been fully rediscovered, and his Charlton era is considered magnificent. And In speaking of the blue chip art world, there's a Spanish art institute in the nation of Spain that several years ago did a massive Ditko retrospective. I don't know if that's coming soon anytime to the Guggenheim or MoMA, but they did it, and they produced a beautiful catalog book, and I was very glad they did it. And Ditko's career is a portrait of an adage that is attributed to Satan in John Milton's Paradise Lost, very famous. Better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven.
Right.
I actually think that was actually probably Julius Caesar, at least historically, according to record, who first uttered those words in the work of what's the ancient Hellenic historian Plutarch. Plutarch records Caesar crossing the Alps with some of his lieutenants, and they come upon this very poor, rundown village. And the lieutenants joke, "Is this village worthy of your conquering?" And Caesar said to them in all seriousness, "I would rather be number one here than be number two in Rome." I think that's a precursor for Milton's statement, "Better to rule in hell than serve in heaven." But I thought Ditko elected to rule in hell, and I was told, and I don't know for sure because he was intensely private, but I was told that when the initial Spider-Man and Doctor Strange movies came out, he was offered money, creators' money, in connection with those movies, probably to forestall future lawsuits, and from him or his estate, and he rejected it, and I thought, because he didn't approve of the movies. And that's another thing I loved about Ditko, because if you're into Ayn Rand's philosophy, if you're into objectivist philosophy, which people always think is amoral, and I totally disagree with that, his ethic as an artist was to abide only by that work that he completely believed in, and he didn't like the movies.
Right.
Probably no surprise there. That was Steve. He didn't like the movies. So instead of complaining and grumbling privately or complaining over a blog while cashing the check, he didn't take the check. And I always say, don't be a hero after you cash the check. If you don't dig it, and if you're going to complain about it, don't take the resources, don't participate. I mean, an artist has no power other than the ability in the world, other than the ability to withhold his or her work. Or consent. So Steve withheld his work and consent, and he is a portrait. He is an exemplar of that statement attributed to Satan. Better to rule in hell. And so, you rule in hell. I mean, you made the decision to go in this direction, knowing that the blue chip art world wasn't quite ready, and yet it's given you tremendous personal happiness.
Yeah, and isn't this is punk rock as well?
Yes.
I mean, one of the reasons I kind of had the courage to leave the film industry and go out on my own is from a Jello Biafra spoken word thing, where he said, in his Jello voice, if you're, he's got that great voice.
Do it.
If you're, what does he say? And if you work for, oh God, if you're an artist, give me 1 second. Let me think.
Yeah.
Oh, he's talking about big corporations. If you're an artist, don't give them your talents. Like, don't give them your talents. Don't let them have that. And I felt like working in the film industry, I was doing that. I was working on other people's dreams. Most of the movies I worked on, I thought were lame, and they weren't inspired, and they weren't, they're I always say if there was more Guillermo del Toro's, I probably wouldn't have left the film industry, because he's like one of us. He's like he's legit. He loves what he's doing. He's all about the monsters. He's a practical effects guy and all this stuff. But I felt like I was giving my talents to the man in a way, and I wasn't really expressing myself. So I back to the punk thing as well. I'm a big fan of the Minutemen, and Mike Watt is one of my heroes, and we happen to be from the same town, weird San Pedro, which is totally bizarre. But he's also indie guy still. He was bass player for the Stooges recently, or he's been the bass player for the Stooges for the last, I think, 10 years, but he's been always his own music, never sold out, always
Hmm.
been like
Hmm.
true to his vision. So anyway, but the point I was going to make though was, you another thing that made me realize I had to meet you and get you on the podcast was you talking about darkness as the womb, as space.
Yes.
And it's like I've said that on the podcast so many times, but I'm talking about dark art, and I'm talking about, it's like I just never use the word Satanism. It's always the word, because I'm putting everything in the context of dark art for dark artists and
Hmm.
people who
Hmm.
appreciate it. And like on my Twitter, it's got the young quote, which is enlightenment is not the no, can't remember. Enlightenment is not the is not imagining beings of light, but making the darkness conscious. And to me,
Yes.
that's dark art in a nutshell right there. It's like, it's spiritual. It's
Yes.
spiritual. It's positive. It's all the things that a legitimate spiritual path claims to be, I believe.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating how our culture is in love with it, but has to keep reprocessing it through metaphors.
Right.
So everybody loves Loki. Well, who do you think Loki is exactly? Everybody loves Darth Vader. Everybody
Right.
loves
Right.
Maleficent. It's like, who do you think these people are? Like
Yeah, yeah.
seriously,
Yeah, and that's
let's
the
all take a look in the mirror together.
right, right. And that's a
Yeah.
thing that goes back to when I was a kid, was I liked the villains, but I was super
Yeah.
sensitive. I was super sensitive. I didn't like hurting animals. I haven't eaten meat
Yeah.
in 30 years.
Yeah.
I remember my friends would shoot birds with BB guns and I would start crying. It was like I could not.
Yeah.
So I was very good, well, whatever, good hearted, I don't know, sensitive hearted, but I always identified with the villains. Like
Yeah.
you remember Tommy, the movie Tommy?
Sure.
Yeah. Remember Cousin Kevin?
Sure.
I used to think Cousin Kevin, he's torturing Roger Daltrey or Tommy
Hmm.
in that scene, but I
The way
thought
Roger behaves, sometimes you might feel. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
but I thought he was cool, even though
Yeah.
I was able to go, it's terrible what he's doing, but I just, it was like, sometimes I wonder, are there, is it a crossed wiring in the brain or something? Because I've always been attracted to it. Darth Vader, the villains, the monsters, Frankenstein. These were the interesting characters to me. And the ones that at least maybe not in Cousin Kevin, in Cousin Kevin's case, but in Frankenstein's case, it was like, you feel bad for them and you
Absolutely.
feel empathy for them. And that's really what I try and do. I think with probably 90% of my monster paintings are, I want to, and invoke a feeling of sympathy or empathy. Like, there's more than, oh my God, that's horrible. I want people to go like, ah, poor,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, the most compelling villains, maybe the only compelling villains, are those with a backstory, who
Right.
have their own reason, their own outlook, their own point of view. And one of the things I always tell people, and this relates to what you were saying, is that first of all, my path is a path of nonviolence, by which I don't mean desisting from legitimate self-defense, but doing nothing to violate or knowingly violate another person's reach for self-potential in the same way that I want that reach
Mm-hmm.
honored in myself. And I really feel as though that's my only ethic on the path, that and transparency. I try to tell the truth about my experience, because if I don't, again, then I'm reverting to a kind of politics. So I aspire to transparency. I aspire to nonviolence, again, by which I mean not disrupting another person's search for his or her own self-development the same way that I reach for mine. Non-invasive, non-coercive, and people can judge the result in conduct. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, that's why I really like that you're open about your path, because um you're uh walking the walk.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly anybody that pays attention to your work knows you're very ethical, and you really try to be, I hate to say a good person, because that's like kind of
Right.
but you know what I'm saying. It
Yeah, it
seems like
sounds
you have,
Pollyannish, but
but you have very strong ethics. It seems very important to you to be an ethical person. I know you talk a lot about sticking to your word and things like this, loyalty,
yeah,
which is,
yeah,
so important. And
so important. And we're embarrassed to talk about it. Like everybody
right,
thinks loyalty is corruption or something. And, it seems
right.
quaint. And I think we should talk about it.
Yeah.
It's funny. I think something that helped me in the search several years ago, and I have to attribute this to Dean Radin, who's a ESP researcher, who's a friend and someone I hold in great esteem. I was telling Dean on this long drive that I was reading the graphic novel Death of Superman. And there were many spin-offs from that. And in one of these spin-offs, Superman's character is revived, but he's lost his powers. He's lost his superpowers, but he's still trying to do good in the world. And by good, I guess I would say he's trying to foster a kind of reciprocity. He's trying to set right imbalanced scales, and that can mean a lot of different things. And so Dean said to me, does he have super emotions? And I said, well, he has super ethics. And Dean said, well, ethics come from the emotions. And I was like, boom, you're absolutely right. And I realized, what else are ethics but empathy,
Right.
reciprocity, the capacity to see another as self, the capacity to sense the wholeness of things. And so it struck me that what we talk about as ethics, and I think morality is kind of like an ersatz ethics, but what we talk about as ethics
Right.
is really just an attempt to formalize empathy. And if a person has a sense of empathy, that person is going to be an ethical person. And
Right.
then we need ethics in a more structured sense when empathy leaves the room. And ethics can be a good guide. There's a place for it. It can be a good guide, but it is a stand-in for empathy. And I
Right.
don't think you can teach a person empathy. I think probably there's some fraction of people who enter this world for whatever reason with a fineness of emotions. And if they have that fineness of emotions, empathy chief among them, they will be ethical. And then we use more formal ethics to try to keep shit going,
Mm,
so, okay, we need traffic lights and we
right.
need stop signs and we need this and we need that. And then sometimes we go overboard, but certain guardrails are needed. But these things are efforts to compensate for an absence of empathy in the broadest sense.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if you know, uh people experiencing tragedy or pain, or uh painful experiences to uh people they love get hurt. This seems to create empathy. You hear often about people who, you know, don't care about abortion rights until their daughter ends up needing an abortion, or
Mm-hmm.
something like this. I wonder
Mm-hmm.
um, if if a state of empathy can develop in a person from, something bad happening to them, or something bad happening to somebody they love. You're talking about, people are, you're sort of saying people are kind of either born with it or not, and I'm just wondering if uh it can develop later in life. Like a lot of addicts,
Mm,
they're these self-centered assholes for most of their lives, and then they
mm,
just go rock bottom, and then I think in being forced to kind of help other addicts, they become more empathetic, maybe. I don't
mm-hmm.
know. I'm just kind of.
Well, that's certainly what Bill Wilson believed. Bill felt that sobriety was only possible in fellowship, that you had to
Mm,
be pulling somebody else into the lifeboat in order to stay into the lifeboat yourself. I mean, you're framing it in an interesting way. Seen from one perspective, I have very little faith in human nature, and I yeah,
Understandable.
and I've always been attached to something, admiring of something that was said by G.I. Gurdjieff, which is that most people have no principle whatsoever. They just have I like and I don't like, I like and they don't like. So they don't like abortion until they or someone they love
Right,
needs an
right,
abortion, and then they like it, temporarily
right,
because it
right.
it suits their needs. At the same time, I have recognized people who go into recovery, and there is a remarkable transformation, a conversion, an epiphany, call it what you will, moment of clarity, and something does change. It could be that those people had an empathic core that was never stimulated in any way, and
Right,
suddenly the feeling that, my God, I'm going to die if I don't get over this,
right,
serves as stimulation. So that is possible, I suppose.
right.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I I had to write a few things down because I wanted this
Sure.
this interview to go well. I normally don't write questions down. I just kind of go by the seat of my pants. But
Anything.
one thing I was thinking was, okay, this idea of Satanism is almost like a reorienting of values in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Like uh and in a way it's kind of an alchemical process.
Mm-hmm.
It's like taking something that was previously considered low and bad and shitty or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of elevating it to this god status or to this holy status.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like it seems kind of like alchemy in a way to me,
Mm-hmm.
unless
Yes.
I'm misunderstanding alchemy, the idea of
No, no, I
principle of
think that's
alchemy.
beautifully put. It's like the transformation of the coarse to the fine.
Right.
And I think that that transformation occurs when we rediscover, reframe outsider ideas that have
Exactly.
been grossly misunderstood, which
Right.
is what a lot of what you do with your art. These
Right.
are, you're not depicting um, suffering for its own sake. You're depicting a suffering that comes from something and then develops into something else. So
Right.
it too is kind of like going from the fine to the coarse to the fine. So I think that there absolutely is an alchemical process there. And one of the things that's been helpful for me recently in my search is I found myself gradually, but then very suddenly, no longer thinking in terms of the standard hierarchical religious model of, good or heaven or what have you is up here, and
Right.
mediocre is over here, and then all the bad shit is down here. And it's all just a conception. It's all just a
Right.
conception. And I think that we on the path don't often realize how deeply framed our search is by familiarity. And I often say now, familiarity is not truth. It doesn't matter how many
Right.
times something has been repeated or how many centuries or millennia our culture has spent telling the same story to itself. That doesn't mean it's true. And the seeker has to verify these things in his or her own experience, and is able to verify them as part of the private search. It doesn't liberate me from everything in outer life. I have relationships, I have debts, and so forth, in the broadest sense of those terms. And that's all there. But within the private confines of your search, it's so exquisitely private. You are given the freedom. Maybe it's the one area in life where the individual is given that total freedom to re-examine things and ask in all earnestness, how do I know this is true? How do I know this is
Right.
true? And I started off our conversation by saying that I've always been very interested in accelerants on the path. And many years ago, I was seated in a meeting of a spiritual group, a very dedicated group, seriously studying esoteric principles, applying esoteric principles, or endeavoring to. And I asked a question, and a senior member of the group, he misheard my question, but he said, there are no shortcuts. And at that moment, it was like a light went on, because I said to myself, okay, good man, did mishear my question, made a statement, there are no shortcuts, to which most people would nod in agreement.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, how do I know that? How
Right.
do I know there are no shortcuts? I don't know that that's actually true. And so moments like that were very helpful to me, because we hear these truisms and we assume that they must be true because they're so overwhelmingly familiar, but we really don't know.
Right. And so much of that is from people who didn't have toilet paper, or people who didn't
Mm-hmm.
know how to read or write. It's
Right.
like so much of that is just kind of I'm not putting down ancient wisdom, obviously, but you know what I'm saying. It was a different world, and that's one of the things I
Yeah.
really enjoyed about. I don't know if it was in a talk you did or in one of your books I've read, but um, you mentioning that the idea of uh, not uh rejecting material wealth and things like this come from eastern generally like eastern practices where there was a different world. Like you didn't have
Yeah.
you never had a chance of being wealthy if you weren't born into it. It's like it's from
Absolutely.
the caste system, so it's like, why are we following these rules that don't apply to us? This is a totally different situation, especially if you're living in America.
Yeah, and within every religion, and we always have to remember that every religion is crafted by human hands, coming from
Right.
a certain time, place, culture, set of needs. Within every religion, I think you find a mixture of the universal and the local. You'll find universal truths that you put to the test in experience, and they stand up, and they stand up in the testimony of many seekers across millennia. And then you find what might be considered the local things that might have been a local concern, a local need.
Mm-hmm.
You certainly find that in terms of hardcore prohibitions, liturgy practice. I mean, the ancient Hebrews were against tattoos. I've
Right,
obviously,
right.
strayed from the flock, but their reasons for that may have been that they were struggling to differentiate themselves from other tribes in
Right.
the Mediterranean area, and everybody had their own ceremonies and so forth. And to hold their society together, they put up certain walls, as we often do. And the principle that you were alluding to of non-attachment, non-identification, I mean, you find that certainly within the Vedic faiths, within Buddhism, within Christianity. And it seems so overwhelmingly persuasive, but it's important to remember that the men and women who were walking the earth at the time when these religions were crafted, and even for centuries and centuries after, they had no more likelihood of exiting the caste from which they were born in than they had of walking on the surface of another planet,
Right,
literally.
right.
And so these religions were serving to salve and address and deal with that foundational problem of life, that you were cemented into a human role that could not be escaped within the structures of the day, but you could look towards the extra physical as a source of salvation or justice or a deeper, greater life. And that may be very, very valid. But life to me is all one whole. And when we start drawing these demarcations, it gets very fuzzy. Where's the line of demarcation between personality and essence, identification, non-identification, attachment, non-attachment, higher, lower? All of these things seem to me to be expressive of one whole existence, not one part being better than, superior
Right.
to, more right than the other. And I came to think less of life in being about non-attachment or non-identification, which are just terms, they're just conceptions of life, then, as all expressions are. I mean, we speak in generalizations so that we can communicate with one another. I do it too. But I came to see life more as a question of self-expression. And
Right.
that self-expression could take place on any number of intersections of existence, whether we call them physical or extra physical. It's one whole. And I think these sharp lines of demarcation were baked into many of our early religious traditions because they addressed the needs that
Yeah.
people were dealing with.
I'm sure it was very helpful back then to have that
Yeah,
to that belief. It helped get you through the day when it was like,
yeah.
hopeless.
And I see seekers today, I see it all the time, as I'm sure many of your listeners do, who get torn apart by these ideas of wanting to express, to attain, to acquire in the broadest sense, and then at the same time striving towards non-attachment, non-identification, not wanting to become a hungry ghost, not wanting to get caught up in the wheel of samsara or illusion.
Mm,
And I see people, especially people who are active within variants of the Vedic faiths or offshoots of the Vedic faith, they can be torn in two by these things because they're striving in the world, and I'm very sympathetic to their strivings. And at the same time, they're imbibing ideas, very often translations of translations of translations, far
Right.
removed from their original source, that are counseling non-attachment. And then you get these crazy situations where, I have people writing to me vociferously defending non-attachment without any sense of irony whatsoever. I have people professing to dedicate their lives to service while throwing a rock at me, while viscerally insulting me or somebody else while they're professing to dedicate themselves to service. And there's no apparent sense of irony whatsoever. So we get into these very strange situations.
Yeah, that's hilarious. When did you, at what point okay, first off, we're about the same age, I think. I'm going to be 55 in November.
I'm 56, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we kind of grew up in the 70s. I found the 70s very creepy, personally. I don't know if it was my, I had a really great, I think, 1 to 3 years is pretty cool, I think. And then there was all this turmoil in my family life, brother and sister fighting, divorce, nightmare going on around me, and me just trying to keep my head down. And you know how it was in the 70s. Nobody told you shit. Nobody told me why my dad left, why my parents, no one even said anything to me. It was crazy. It seems crazy now, but to me, it's like there was this undercurrent, and this is probably just my personal experience, but there was like this undercurrent of kind of this dread with saccharine sweet music being played, like the Carpenters in the background, which is so weird and creepy. So now whenever I hear a Carpenter song, it gives me like this weird nostalgic kind of creepy feeling. And it probably worked its way into my art. And probably part of the reason I love this sort of thing is it does speak to my experiences that growing up was a weird mix of, I don't know, that and the fact that my grandfather used to put a Halloween caveman mask. You probably would recognize the caveman
mask. Yes, of course. Yes, bring back the caveman mask. Right.
I'm a total nerd about that stuff. It was the Topstone caveman mask. Topstone made these really bad masks.
It was
And my grandfather used to put this mask on because he was like the crazy, wacky jokester, and turn the lights off in the house and chase us around the house with the caveman mask on.
I love that.
And then when he grabbed you, he turned the light on under your face. So it's like it was really terrifying because I was probably like 5 years old, but it was also super fun. So I think maybe that may be where my wires got sort of crossed, but I don't know. I felt like this is genetic to me. It's always been in my family. Occultism has kind of always been in the family. My mother, my sister have always seen ghosts. It was just like a normal thing. They always had that talent. So none of this stuff was weird to me. So that's also why I appreciate you doing, leaning so heavily on the empirical stuff, because it's not like that for most people. Most people don't believe it, just frankly.
Right.
To me, it's like,
oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. No, it's just, to me, it was like a part of life.
Yeah.
It was no big deal.
I'm not sure why I'm so attached to empiricism. I spend a lot of time, especially in Daydream Believer, but other places as well, writing about ESP research, which I'm a big advocate of, and I'm a big defender of. And I really, really try to go through and sort it out and rescue what I think has been damaged by decades of terribly cynical and inaccurate criticism. And this stuff has overtaken Wikipedia, and there's not a hell of a lot any of us can do about it. But it's natural enough to go onto Wiki and look up War of 1812 and feel like you're going to get some reasonably accurate guideposts. You go in and you put up ESP research or J.B. Ryan or precognition, and you're not only getting articles that are suffused with unspoken partisanship, but they are referenced to sources very often from the same publishing house or the same den of magazines, Prometheus books and Skeptical Inquirer and some other things. It's like you're sourcing your material explicitly to Fox News and Newsmax and such, and
Right.
saying, well, here you go, folks. And so it's a big gap in on Wikipedia, but there's not a lot I can do about it.
Right.
But I can, in my own work, try to rescue some of this material and tell the story in a way that I hope is revelatory and revealing. And I use lots of notes because I want people to call me out. I want people to go to my notes and see, am I exaggerating? Test me, call me out. And I get very attached to, sometimes I'll get very attached to the persona of a certain person. And then from that, I will launch into a body of ideas. So I got very interested in the figure of J.B. Rhine, who was the founder of the parapsychology lab at Duke University in the early 1930s. And JB was wonderful because he was one of the first hardcore academic ESP researchers in the United States. And he really, I would say, really helped make parapsychology into a scholarly field. Obviously, there were foundations to that, William James and Frederick Myers and a lot of other people, but JB really brought it onto the campus, got it funded, made it into a recognized academic field, took terrible criticism, a lot of it unfair. And I saw him as this very solid, stalwart figure who said, look, I'm going to tell the truth. I am going to design protocols intended to test for extraphysical perception. And I will amass statistics, lay bare my sources, my methodology, throw open my door, literally, and my sources to skeptics, including to people who are overtly hostile to me, and I will tell the truth. And that's what JB ventured to do. And he may have made some mistakes in his career, the chief among them being that he never, at least as long, I mean, life only gives us so much time. His health declined towards the end of his life, and he did not propose a theory of ESP, a delivery system, a theoretical mechanism. And if you're gonna involve yourself in Western science, a theory is important. It's too important, and it shouldn't be, and it can feel like an injustice. But if you're going to go down that route, those are your in-laws, and you have to deal with your in-laws at a certain point, and that's the call for a theory. He didn't do that. But it was also part of his integrity. He felt like, look, I'm not a metaphysician, I'm not a philosopher, I'm a statistician, and I'm going to amass evidence. And so I was very turned on by him as an individual, and he became an intellectual hero to me. And so I suppose that attracted me to empiricism. Some of my friends criticized me and say, you're too attached to empiricism. You will find much better examples of precognition, ESP, telepathy, and so forth through testimony. And in fact, it's much more likely to show up in moments of crisis or moments of passion than it is in the cold, linoleum-tiled, white coat atmosphere of the laboratory. And I accept that, and they're right. But I had to go down that path. I feel like, I suppose I get interested in ideas and themes because I feel like something is worth defending. And I felt like J.B. Rhine's legacy was worth defending. And then, of course, I encountered other researchers, other clinicians who followed in his wake, and I came to feel that in many cases, their legacies were worth defending. So that's what led me into the lab.
I think it's a service though you're providing really for the the whole study of ESP and things like that. I think that's because that's, if anything's going to convince people to at least take a second look, it's you, people like you, saying, look at the empirical evidence. For people like me, it doesn't matter. I mean, I find it interesting because it's like, I know it's true. So I do like to read studies that kind of confirm that what I know is true. But I think it's great I think it's important. It's important that you include that in your work, because, anybody could write a book about, and many people have, about anecdotal studies, and then you're kind of just preaching to the choir. But there's when you have empirical evidence presented, or you're able to present it, you're potentially reaching a wider audience of people that don't really consider that, or maybe people that are kind of on the fence.
And that's been my experience. People who are on the path already believe in the extra-physical, have had experiences with the extra-physical sometimes, so they're persuaded. The hardcore skeptics, that's a psychological ecosystem all of
Yeah.
its own that it cannot be reached. I mean,
Right.
it's like trying to convince a hardcore, MAGA person that the election wasn't faked.
Right.
You'll never reach them. It's
Don't
become an
even bother.
article of
Yeah.
faith. Yeah. But what I find the most exciting responses I receive are from people who are indifferent to the subject. I might be talking to a
Mm,
physician, or I might be talking to, I don't know, just somebody from some walk of life who does not have a strong partisan feeling one way or the other. And they're like, no shit. And they might pitch tough questions at me, which is something I don't get from the skeptics. I want to
right.
debate the skeptics, but they are so dedicated to winning that they are the people who will flip over the chessboard if the game is going against them.
Right.
And this is all but literally true. And they will suppress or falsify stuff, or just respond with rhetorical questions or snideness, or they're proudly ignorant of the data, and I when somebody's proudly ignorant of data, it's impenetrable. It's
Yeah.
simply
Right.
impenetrable. And there are problems in ESP research, and I need skeptics to make me better, to
Right.
challenge me, but they've got to challenge me in ways that are real. Like the problems, for example, is there is a huge problem with fraud in general in the social sciences. Parapsychology is part of the social sciences. Let's have a conversation about that. There are problems with arguably with small statistical samples. Let's talk about
Right.
that. In meta-analyses, meta-analysis sounds like a big fancy term for pooling data. There are a lot of different methods that are used in meta-analysis that are controversial, and we should talk about that. But an objection is not ESP can't be real because it can't be real. That's not an
Yeah.
objection, but that's the beginning and the end of most intellectual of the depth, and then there's cleverness, and there's sarcasm, and there's,
Hmm.
just in some cases out and out misrepresentation. And I simply don't, I reach the limits of my understanding of human nature in such situations, because I don't want to win by fakery, or by averting my eyes from something, or by flipping over the chessboard. I want to be right, but I want to tell the truth more than I want to be right.
Right. Yeah.
And for the skeptics, the professional skeptics, winning becomes more important than demonstrating. And that's the antithesis of rationalism, which they think they're defending. So it's very hard to find people to debate.
Yeah. It's funny because I mean, what happens when that happens to them though?
Oh,
Because
you should see.
they might
Oh my
have,
God. Yeah.
because sometimes these things just happen randomly, or they happen once in a person's life, you know?
In my experience, and the professional skeptic Michael Shermer used to be a columnist for Scientific American, and I quote him a couple of times in Daydream Believer,
Yeah.
in one instance where he talks about a tantalizingly paranormal episode that occurred in his
Right. I just
life
read that last
on
night.
his wedding day. Yeah. But I've observed there's like this reverse habituation among the skeptics. They will, in private and sometimes in public, attest to something, and then when they go back into their peer group, their heads get turned around. They sort
Right.
of get deprogrammed or whatever. And then they come back the next day. I was having a debate with a professor somewhere, and we were talking about these experiments called the Gansfeld experiments. And a Gansfeld is German for whole field or open field. There were a series of enormously persuasive telepathy experiments in the 1970s and 80s. And in a once in a generation, maybe once in a century event, a parapsychologist, lovely man named Charles Honorton, who's now dead, and a skeptic, a psychologist from the University of Oregon, Ray Hyman, collaborated on a paper. And they said, look, whether one believes or disbelieves in the ESP thesis, this data is unpolluted and it requires further research. And that's all I ask. Let's keep the question alive. But the same skeptic later is asked about experiments into precognition that Darrell Bem did at Cornell, and other psychologists. And he says to the New York Times, it's craziness, just pure craziness. It's an embarrassment to the whole field. And it's like, do you know what language means? Pure craziness? You're sure that's the term you want to use? You know, it's like saying beneath contempt. Like, how many
Right.
things are actually beneath contempt? You know, you sure that's the language you want to use? And what happens is, I was starting by saying that I was having this contentious exchange with this professor, and he acknowledged to me on social media, so it's public, yes, the Gansfeld experiments are remarkable. And I'm like, dude, that's it. You don't need to sign on to my belief system. You don't need to avow my belief system. The very next day, he reverses himself and goes, ESP isn't real. And my attitude is, then there's nothing for us to debate, because if we've come to a place where you don't have to concede the ESP thesis, but you concede that the data is not polluted, the validity of the data, but then you completely reverse yourself the next day. Again, I've hit my limits of human nature. I don't understand that. So it's very hard to find people to have an authentic debate with.
Yeah, I can imagine. Have you had any out-of-body experiences?
I'm not sure I've had out-of-body experiences exactly, but not in terms of shape-shifting or a near-death experience or anything of that nature.
Floating around after you fall asleep in that hypnagogic state, you kind of start floating.
I haven't personally had that. I have had very, very rare experiences, but enormously viscerally real and tactile, of meditating. My practice is transcendental meditation, a mantra-based form of meditation. I have had experiences of feeling a complete disillusion of self, absolutely no sense of physicality whatsoever, no sense of proportion, no sense of perspective, no tactile experience even. And it's been exquisite and scary, and very, you know, and you can't plan for it. It just, you know, it's very rare that it's happened. And maybe it'll never happen again. Maybe it'll happen this afternoon.
Yeah, I had that one time. I had that on mushrooms, because I've taken psychedelics. That's funny too, because the punk rock magic time in my life, like 1987, it was around the time of remember the harmonic convergence?
Of course.
Yeah. That spurred the whole thing for me. It was like me, my friend, and another friend, which became my wife, got together to do a Ouija board on the harmonic convergence.
Wow.
And that started this whole crazy path. But
heavy.
Yeah.
Other people have told me that have had such experiences during that time.
Wow. Yeah. And so
including the channeler Paul Selig, whose works you may know. Paul's a very popular channeler, and he had his first clairaudient experience during the harmonic convergence.
Wow. Yeah. That's interesting.
Best I can remember.
That it was kind of like my spiritual puberty, I guess, is the harmonic convergence, because I started having out-of-body experiences right after like my physical puberty. Like around age 12, 13 is when I had my first out-of-body experience. And it's been something that happens all the time. I just had one 2 nights ago, where I get I start to fall asleep. I get this thing in my head that I can only describe as you, and I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna go out of body again, and I can't really help it, and I just float. And unless I go, from reading Robert Monroe, who's like a big out of body study guy, one thing I really learned from him was, if you say I can see, or I want to move forward, or I want to go flying outside, you will do it. It's like you have to think your way to doing things. You can't just do it. Like that mechanism isn't there that we have as physical beings, where you just, my arm, you don't have to think, I want my arm to go here, and it goes here. You just go like that. And it doesn't work in that state. But I had that one experience of that kind of selfless thing one time. I've had all kinds of amazing mystical experiences on acid and mushrooms. And I don't really do it anymore. I'm like all about meditation now, but I just don't feel the need to do it anymore. But I had one where I felt like, it's like, it was so weird, because me and my friend took it. It was when we were working on the documentary this guy was making about me, and we decided to have a trip and discuss where the movie should go. And the movie ended up being more about dark art than about myself, because we saw that's the way it was going. And anyway, 15 minutes after taking it, which is very fast if you're familiar with psychedelics, it's very fast to just kick in like that. 15 minutes of taking this, I was like, oh, turn the light off. I feel it coming on. He turned the light off in the room, and boom, I was gone. I was in total darkness, but I could, it's like, it's hard to explain. It was like, I was not physical, but my mind was so clear. My mind was as clear. I like to describe it as a lake without a ripple on it.
That's wonderful.
And I felt like I could think anything right now and probably get the answer for it, but I didn't even think to do that because it was so fleeting, and
That's
shocking.
wonderful. That's wonderful.
And I was talking to my friend. I'm like, "Are you experiencing this?" Which he wasn't, but my voice was very deep and resonant. It was very weird. I could hear myself, and it was kind of like it was coming from like this deeper place. And he's like, "No," and then I started getting afraid that I was gonna like, not come back. And as soon as I did, I was back in my body, and my stomach was like, oh, I was having these terrible mushroom pains in my stomach. But it was profound. It was really amazing. It was really, really amazing. I haven't had that with meditation yet, although I have like locked. I've gotten the thing where your body kind of locks. Have you ever gotten that? And it's like your body kind of feels numb.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like a total stillness, and it's
you're
almost like a
made of
sleep
stone.
paralysis in a way.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I brought up the out of body thing because that's been like, it seems like people are born with natural proclivities to certain abilities, and
yes,
I was never really good at premonitions, although I've had a couple precognitive dreams that came true for sure, that were weird, but it was always out of body, and it was visualization and manifesting, or I like the way you talk about manifesting too, as what you use a different term. What's the term again?
Selecting.
Yeah, selecting. And it's like that's really been such a big change in my practice. Just thinking about it, like you're selecting a reality that kind of already exists, and you're just like sliding into it.
Right. That's the theory. Yeah.
It feels more natural to me. It feels better. It makes more sense. But anyway,
if I may add something,
you've
sort of helped me come to something as you were talking about the psychedelic experience, and the fact that we all seem to be born with certain proclivities towards certain experience. And that probably accounts for a lot of why I am so into empiricism.
Yeah,
because I have, and I say this in a completely neutral way. I'm not proud of it. I'm not happy about it. In some ways, it's a barrier, but I have a very logical, very rational mind, and I pursue my belief in study of the extra-physical, both through experience, but also through what might be called logic or rationalism, which attests, I think, to why I'm so interested in empiricism, apropos of ESP research and so forth. And it also informs some of my writing on mind metaphysics, because one of the core methods in mind metaphysics is that you're supposed to enter the feeling state of the wish fulfilled. And I honor that, but I experience difficulty with that sometimes. So one of my motivating exercises in Daydream Believer is to experiment with whether the wish itself is capable of enacting these extra physical agencies, these selective agencies of the psyche. So if the psyche can move freely among different intersections of time, and I feel, and I argue for this in the book, there's almost an imperative at the back of that, based on everything we've experienced in different facets of both the sciences and the search over the past 150 years. I mean, again, this is just a line of demarcation that's a generalism, but I think it's almost an imperative that the psyche does have some extra physical capacity, and unlocking that is something that I'm interested in coming at from a very simple perspective. And I believe deeply in the possibility of very, very simple methods, which is why I'm so into New Thought and mind metaphysics, if they're applied with absolute passion and absolute wanting. And so I've asked myself, and I explore this in the first chapter of Daydream Believer, whether a wish in and of itself may be sufficient to enact these mental capacities, or psychical, I should say, capacities. I mean, I speak more in terms of the psyche, which I see as a compact of thought and emotion. And I probably one of the reasons I have not gravitated more towards ceremonial magic, and I do participate in ceremonial magic, although my term for my personal practice is anarchic magic, because
Yeah, I
I
love
believe
that.
in moving. Oh, thank you. I believe in moving among all these worlds. But again, among the principles of ceremonial magic, I wouldn't call it an orthodoxy, but it's a principle,
Right.
is that you perform the ritual and then you forget it. You know, you just forget all about that. And so you'll find that in chaos magic, you'll find that in the work of Anton LaVey. And I have found I can't do that.
Right.
I can't make the ritual into a stand-in for the thing itself, and I can't stop thinking about it. My
Right.
mind is always running. So I don't think that Mother Nature had just played this cruel cosmic joke on me or people like me where, well, sorry, you know, no magic for you, you know. But I think that we just find different roads to Rome. We find alternative methods. And so part of my search has been finding personal techniques and
Right.
methods that suit the nature of my mind, my psyche, which tends to be very hyper vigilant, hyper aware, hyper rationalistic. And, you know, rather than trying to force myself into a methodology that doesn't suit my temperament, I try to find
Right.
these alternate methods. And this is apropos of what you were saying about how we all seem to be born with different proclivities.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the things I thought that kind of blew my mind about your Daydream Believers, the idea that the wish itself could be it. Do you remember that Twilight Zone called The Wish? That
Was
Twilight
that with the young
episode?
boy who was friends with the boxer?
Yeah.
Where he goes, you got to believe, you got to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
was very
first
touched
thing
by that.
that's the
Very
first thing I
touched.
thought of, because
Oh, that's so funny because I think of that episode all the time and I've never written about it. So that's amazing.
it's
That's
so
amazing.
it's
I
like,
was thinking about that. Yeah.
yeah, it's so because that episode always really resonated with me, but at the same time I was like, oh, I wish it could be like that a wish could be real, you know.
And maybe it could, you know,
I know,
I
that's the
encourage
thing.
that experiment. I
That's the
remember that
thing.
vividly, that kid saying, you know, the boxer's been defeated and the kid is saying to the boxer, Bowley, you've got to believe, you've got to
You
believe.
gotta
And I thought,
believe. You gotta
how do I,
believe.
right. And I loved it because it's so simple. It's so
Yeah,
simple.
right.
And how do I know? Again, it comes
Right.
back to there are no shortcuts. Do I know that? Do I
Right.
know that? Because what was encapsulated in that episode was, in a sense, the human wish. You know, we want to create. We're told that we're made in the image of the creator in Western scripture, or Hermeticism tells us as above, so below. So it stands to reason that the individual wants to create, wants to enact these causative powers. And that episode for me, I'm so stoked that you mentioned that, because A, I haven't watched that in years, and B, it was running through my mind like crazy when I was writing that chapter,
Oh,
and you
cool.
just nailed it.
That's
Yeah,
so cool.
it's
Because
wild.
I just thought the other thing that really lines up with your theories about how this stuff works and selective versus manifesting is, in that episode, it's like he goes back to, it's like he wins and then he goes back to the reality where he loses because he won't believe in the wish. And it's like,
Right.
it's just funny because I remember watching that, and you know, I've seen it all my life, but watching it maybe 5 years ago and thinking, man, this is a really good episode that I never, I don't know, not listed among the classics that you know, most people do.
Right.
But it's a really good one, and there's something about it. It's like there was something about it that hit me, that like there was some truth to it.
I felt the same way. And, you know, Rod Serling was such an interesting guy because he grew up a Jew, converted to Unitarianism, was never explicitly supernatural, but in all of his stories, you know, he would explore these different themes as though to ask, what if? Sometimes in a nightmare way, you know, so we get to serve man, and sometimes in this idealistic way, you know, you've got to believe. And I feel like, look, the man was just probing these human archetypal situations. Is it possible? What if? Where could we go very wrong? Where could we go very right?
Yeah, I think you know, any artist, writer, you know, anyone in the arts or a creative person has access to all of this. If you get out of your own way and let your
Yeah.
creative mind, do the work. Basically, as an artist, I feel that, that as a painter specifically, but I know that I'm sure this is true as a writer or any other
Hmm.
creative artist, musician, is your job is to serve the art that you're creating. It's like you're a servant to the art. And
Yes.
in a sense, that's why I've always kind of viewed art as my religion in a way, even though I've always been very God centered in a way. I've always felt very connected to what people would call God, although, I'm not like, you can tell how I am. I'm cool, I'm like,
Right. No, I
I'm not
dig,
like super Christiany, but at the
Yeah,
same time,
yeah.
I'm kind of like, I feel like I have a lot in common with you, where you talk about all the religions in the same way, and you find the
Hmm.
wisdom in that. I think that's really cool.
Hmm.
But
And
anyway, it's like,
just, apropos of what you're saying, I'm sorry for the interruption.
no problem.
Like, as I moved away from concepts of God, I still found myself really admiring the search of people who have those concepts, including, as we were talking about earlier, people in the recovery movement. And
Hmm.
one of the great things that Bill Wilson did in AA is that he directed the individual to seek a higher power as he or she
Right.
understands it. And I dig that enormously, but I was still stymied by the term higher power because it's still very Abrahamic, and
Yeah, yeah,
that's
right.
just not my way of thinking.
Right.
So I've started to use the term greater force,
Mm,
relating to a greater force, and
right.
I feel that helps the individual who's looking for flexibility find greater flexibility.
Interesting. That's a good idea. I always say that my mom was a science of mind person.
Oh yeah.
And I was so weird because I was like, I didn't know any other families in my neighborhood that were into that. And even growing up, I hardly ever heard anything about science of mind. And I was like, Ernest Holmes, science of mind. It was like, I remember it. And I remember my mom telling me about, things she learned during the services. And she taught me how to do creative visualization is
That's
how it was
wonderful.
presented to me.
I love Ernest Holmes. Love him.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
where, where did you grow up?
San Pedro, California.
Oh, right. You mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I Science of Mind helped open a lot of doors for me.
Yeah,
And
it was exciting to see
yeah.
you mentioning it, because I was
Hmm.
like, oh, someone finally talking about science of mind. I felt
Yeah.
like, I felt like maybe it was some weird cult thing, because I just
Right.
couldn't find a lot of resources on it or other people that had
And
similar experience.
there's another example of running away from language, and I don't think people should run away from language. What used to be known as the United Church of Religious Science is now called Centers for Spiritual Living, and part of the reason for that change
Right.
is that people were confusing religious science with Scientology, and it's like, well,
Right.
so what?
Or
Then
Christian
just
science, maybe
or
too,
Christian science, then just explain it to them, but don't
Right.
don't run away from your history.
Right. Right. Yeah, I remember my mom talking about the plant experiments where
Hmm.
they put meters up to plants and the certain
Yes.
plants, and this is like in the 70s, my mom telling me this stuff. She actually, I talk about it in my documentary too. She at one point said, visualize Jimmy, my stepdad, who's also a painter, visualize Jimmy selling a painting and that you could buy anything you want in the mall. And so
That's
I did it.
wonderful.
And then like 2 weeks later, he sold a painting, like a big painting. And so I went to the mall and I picked out this big metal blimp sculpture that was like a mechanical blimp sculpture. I still have it. It has these little bug-like characters, like wacky characters, all kind of hanging off the blimp. It was a weird thing for a 9-year-old to choose, but it was like, so as far as I'm concerned, it was like from age 9, I was like, this stuff works. Anytime I needed money for plaster when I was learning to make masks growing up, I would visualize it and get the $200 I needed out of nowhere
And there's
every
so
time.
much. This story is so beautifully instructive because I always tell people you can't fake your passions. You have to have
Right.
passions in play. And in Daydream Believer, I have a chapter called The Wish Machine, based in
Yeah.
part on the movie Stalker, and the novel it was based on, Roadside Picnic. And the Wish Machine in this paradigm, it will read your passions and it will give you what you want. And it may feel very alienating if you're not frank with
Right.
yourself. I
Yeah.
mean, unembarrassed and deeply, deeply, profoundly frank. And so mom recognizes that to ignite your passions, dad sells a painting and then you can go to the mall and buy whatever you want, which is wonderful. And in the spiritual culture, of course, we get all like icky over this, like, oh, that's like, spiritual materialism and what have you. And I don't buy that.
Yeah.
And I remember I do some work with the David Lynch Foundation, which teaches transcendental meditation to school kids.
Mm-hmm.
And one time they had a conference at a hotel here in town. I'm in New York City. Mm-hmm. And there were different high school kids speaking about their experience with TM. And one kid got up and he said, I love video games and TM has made me better at my video games. I'm scoring higher. And I was like, right fucking on, because so many people, so many young kids especially, video games are a fundamental part of their lives. And I loved that this kid was speaking so frankly, and that none of the organizers were trying to corral him in any way. Like, it's not, oh, now I visualize world peace. It's like, no, I'm doing much better at God of War, And I was like, right on, because he's telling the truth. He's telling the truth. And it was beautiful.
Yeah. It's funny because I've been bringing this stuff up with I have two step granddaughters.
Wow.
Yeah. 11 and 12. They're starting to get to that age where I can start presenting this stuff to them. I want to teach them. And I was like talking to them the other day. I was like, because I taught them how to meditate. I know they don't do it, but I figure if I'm giving them the tools, and if they're into it, they can do it. But it was so funny because my older granddaughter's at that age where she wants to start buying clothes. She's coming out of this childhood and she's going into adolescence and she wants to buy clothes. And I'm like, talking to her about magic. I can teach you how to do this stuff, how to manifest things.
Yeah.
And she's like, sounds boring, it's typical.
Right. They have to push back.
Yeah. And I said, you could visualize for money to buy clothes. And she was like, you can. And she suddenly got really interested. It's like, if that's what it takes to teach her just the tools, to give her the tools to be able to have the life that she wants, that's fine.
I dig that. I mean, that, and again, this is where I like to collapse these categories that we create within the spiritual culture. This idea that like, oh, it's mass consumerism or what have you. Well, first of all, there's always been consumerism and there's always going to be consumerism. And for a kid, for an adult, clothes are uniform. They're an emblem. They tell the world who you are. I don't tell a Tibetan monk, don't wear those robes. Right. You're too attached to. That's part of his or her sense of dedication. And I think that outward appearance, and I write really, really explicitly about this in the Miracle Habits and some other place. I think outward appearance and the cultivation of outward appearance is every bit as valid as what we call inner development. Through outward appearance, the person is attempting to express his or her true self. It's not the adoption of a mask, it's the dropping of a mask in a certain sense.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, and we have this terrible hang up within the spiritual culture, even though concurrent with that, we all also pursue it. Everybody's wearing their uniform, so to speak. And
even if it's the slacker, I don't give a shit how I look uniform. That's still the uniform.
It's announcing something to the outward world. And I think that we need to get down with the idea that expression is a wholeness. It's not inner or outer. And I think that an individual, through altering his or her outward appearance in whatever way is personally validating, can work enormous effects in a life that we might not at first see. And I want people to feel very, very liberated in that option and not feel like, oh, I'm being unspiritual or something.
Right.
What would that mean? What would that mean? So, it's the cultivation of self in all its facets.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I'm at 10:30 here, so my time. So I want to be respectful of your time.
I'm totally digging it. Don't just Yeah.
Okay.
We can do an encore set. It's totally cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
go ahead.
I
Yeah.
definitely would love to have you on again too.
Oh, and I
For
mean, like
sure.
just here right now, don't feel pressured time wise. I'm
Okay.
totally
Oh,
digging it. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
I wanted to say one thing, a number of things, but one thing I'm thinking of right now is that, one of the things you bring up in your books about, you got me also really back into the feeling aspect of your, you know, for your wish,
Mm-hmm.
really focusing on the feeling of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is something I was more of a, uh, uh, um, uh, affirmations guy, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, in fact, I don't think my mom even taught me the feeling part of it. It was more like focusing on the thing, imagining seeing it, imagining saying it's already there, affirmations type stuff. And maybe she did, but I don't. But I remember focusing more on that stuff still, and it still worked for me. But there may be. I was thinking that. I know you said sigil stuff never really worked that well for you, which is, not everything works
I
for
do
everybody.
use it. I do
Okay.
use it. I haven't had that, like, parting the Red Sea moment,
Yeah, yeah,
but I
yeah.
do believe in it and I do
Yeah, yeah.
use it. Yeah.
I've had, they've worked every time for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering, if I wonder, since you bring up, like, I love the idea that prayer is a valid form, when at times when you're not feeling it, when you're
Yes.
feeling desperate, prayer is the only thing that is going to
Mm-hmm.
work. You
Yes.
can't make yourself have the good feeling when you're bombing hard.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I was wondering if maybe sigils, uh as a person that is able to forget them for some reason, I am like, my mind, I've got OCD, my mind goes, but I am able to kind of forget my sigil stuff for some reason, or at least not really think about it. But I'm wondering if sigil stuff might function better for things that you aren't super passionate about, but you still want to manifest. Like, I got to pay this bill in 2 weeks, but I don't, I'm not, it's not exciting to pay this bill, but I do need the
Mm.
money and I'm not sure where it's going to come from. So, I can do this kind of dispassionate sigil for it.
I think that's wonderful.
So
So
maybe
the forgetting becomes less of
it's
a
not an
wrestling
issue
match
because you're not
because
super
you
passionate about it. It's more like a need
fascinating.
that you need. So I thought
Fascinating.
maybe
I love that. I
maybe
love
that's,
that. I'm going to experiment with that. I love that. I
oh,
love
cool.
that. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just thought that, that might be its place, maybe
Yeah.
that's how it works.
That's fascinating because I always go to the full on end with sigils,
Yeah.
and hence it's very difficult for me to walk away from the thing. But if the thing is something that I'm not thirsty for, like I'm parched,
Right.
it could allow that forgetfulness and permit a different process. I think that's wonderful. I'm going to experiment with that.
Oh, cool. Cool.
I'll report back.
Wow, I'm honored. And another thing I wanted to bring up too is that I feel that I completely manifested my career
Mm-hmm.
into being, because when I started, I knew there was no market for it. I had no idea how I was going to make a living. I was painting something that wasn't popular. And but I knew I was good. I worked hard. I work every day like you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
super I grind it all the time. And so I did the work. I worked very hard at it. But on top of that, I was doing every night for months and months. I was doing the wish or doing the visualization or whatever you want to
Mm-hmm.
call it,
Mm-hmm.
hard, as I was going to sleep, hard, because I wanted this so hard.
Yes. Yes.
It was the thing. I was like, because I felt trapped in my job. As much as, making monsters for movies is super fun, but
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't anymore. I didn't have the passion anymore. It's like I wasn't being able to express myself, my true artistic vision. But so I would do it so hard, and I got it exactly as I asked for it. And I didn't ask for the money too. That's the thing. It's like,
Uh,
I'm at a point where it's like, yeah, now I'm focusing on the money, because I don't want to have to
yeah.
work this hard and always be doing it every month, coming up with the bills money for bills at the last minute. It's just not
Mm-hmm.
fun. And the funny thing is, when I was working on manifesting this, I still had this hang up from about money that I really did get from my parents, because they were always broke. It was feast or famine. Him as an artist, he got to do what he loved his whole life. They didn't have to work
Yeah.
crappy jobs.
Yeah.
And so they did get that, but they had a hang up on money, which is something a lot of people from that era had, I think, especially spiritual people had a hang up on
Yeah.
money. And I
Yeah.
definitely inherited that. So, but the funny thing is, when I was doing the manifestation, it was to be a successful and well-respected artist.
Hmm.
But I should have put a rich, successful, because I
Well,
am successful. I'm successful enough to make a living, which is amazing.
yeah.
But I have to work my ass off. I have to work 7
Yep.
days a week all the
I
time.
dig.
And
I
I'm good
dig.
with that, but I just want a little more money, so it's not so
I
stressful. That's it.
dig.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
I mean, I would offer this. I'm in the exact same position. I've had the exact same experience you just described to the letter.
Mm.
And it wasn't because I'm dismissive of money or anything like that. It's just that it's always been secondary to me.
Right, right.
And so I tend to, but I would also say this, the, passions don't lie. And I think to enact the wish machine, so to speak, you have to feed it with passion, and it
Mm.
will give you back that which you're passionate about. And there's no lying. Emotions don't lie. And so I think one has to allow, you have to sort of let your freak flag fly in terms of this process and go with what you wish for. And then money can also be added onto that. I don't think the door is closed.
Mhm.
But I would also say for me, certainly, and perhaps for you, that circumstance has driven me to work so
Right.
much.
I think
And I,
that too.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
do it out of passion, but I get better and better. I'm a better
And
writer today than I was 2 years ago.
right,
You know,
I say this all the time. As much as I bitch about never having enough money and this capitalist system's a killer and this and
yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah,
it has pushed me. I've got a huge body of work behind
yeah,
me that I can use to make money from. I mean, I've done a lot. Even art painters are like, man, you paint a lot. And anybody that knows that it's good at any craft, you have to do it over and over and over to get good at it. So it really,
absolutely.
that
Th- th-
necessity pushed me to create a ton of work and make me a way better painter. But at this point, I'm ready for the money.
Oh, and
You
that's
know what
that's
I mean?
100% legitimate. So there could be revision. There could be
Right.
revision in your process. And William Blake wrote, "Opposition is true friendship," and there's so
Mhm.
much within that.
Right, right.
And I have this anthology called Uncertain Places coming out in October, and
Yeah.
I'm super proud of it. But I'm a better writer today than I was when I completed a lot of the pieces that have gone in there. And I look at it, I'm like, fuck, if only I had included Painted Black, but it's like,
Right.
well, there'll have to be another anthology
Right.
and so forth. But you see that sweat equity nets results, and you become a better artist in whatever your medium is when you work and work and work, just like a martial artist or an
Hmm.
athlete or a dancer or what have you. And the sweat equity is such a payoff. And it may be that became the bridge of incident that allowed you to become outstanding at your art. The one of the driving passion, absolutely. The wish for expression, absolutely. But also the need for resources. And the
Hmm.
need for resources means like I'm going to work constantly, and surprise, you get better constantly
Yeah,
also.
true.
So yeah, opposition is true friendship. And so it helps. That's the medium, that's the means through which your excellence was refined. And I found that in my life. But I have exactly the same situation. And it may just be that, well, if you really feel it passionately, and again, the emotions will tell the truth, there can be revision.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm working on now. And it's like,
Yeah,
since I started, it has been getting better
that's great.
financially. So I'm just not
That's
at it.
great.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's great. I'm just, you know, I'm not quite
You
there
want to
yet.
buy that thing at the mall.
Yeah,
You need that
I want to put in
Zeppelin model, or so
I want to put a
yeah.
roof on my house. Is why my roof is falling apart. My house needs painting. It's like necessity stuff. It's like I
Yeah.
don't. So it's really like I don't. I just want to paint, be with my wife, see my grandkids. It's so simple what I want, but it's like I need money. I'm in California. You know how it is in New York. Costs a
Absolutely.
lot of money,
It
So
does. I have two kids I raise. One just went off to
yeah,
college, and
once
it's
you have
very
kids,
real.
forget it, man. It's like
Very
it's
real. Yeah,
expensive.
for
So
real. For
I
real.
really did I got over my issue with money. So and it's
Hmm.
funny because my sister was never like that. She's the one person in the family that always did really well with money. And
Yep.
she was the rebel and the one that all the problems got blamed on because she wouldn't take any shit between, all the stuff that was going on between my mom and my dad. She sort of got like scapegoated, but she was like this
Hmm.
independent, she would never accept this term, but she was the satanic one as far
Yeah.
as being like the one that stood up, left
Yeah.
home early, made a bunch of money, had the
Yeah.
confidence in herself, regardless of everybody giving her shit for being a bad kid when she wasn't really. So it's interesting. It's
It's
interesting.
funny. We're like doppelgangers because I had an
Yeah.
older sister
Oh,
who was the
really?
same way.
I'm telling
And
you.
today, she has like three homes and everything. And I had a more ambivalent feeling, at age 17 than she did. And we both looked at our childhood circumstances and realized our parents would not be able to support us into adulthood.
Hmm.
So we took different paths. She went to law school, and I became a historian of the occult, not traditionally your path to financial security. But we both responded to those circumstances differently, and it was only as I got older that I realized that I could really honor and admire her approach, because it,
Right.
it was really successful and necessary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. The reason I was bringing up the out of body thing is kind of getting back to, uh, I've had out of body experiences that were amazing and
Hmm.
felt like one I had, one of my first one was terrifying, and where a figure was standing next to me. So weird. Heavy set guy with a down vest, like a
Hmm.
trucker, and a
Hmm.
flannel shirt, kind of heavy set, holding a pillow over his face, like holding it by one corner in front of his face so I couldn't see his face. And then he kept hitting me with it
Hmm.
and putting it back up. It was so,
Hmm.
and I was just like, I got the dread, the feeling of existential dread, and I couldn't get out of it. But there was a voice in my head saying, he can only scare you, he can't hurt you. And it kept
Right.
saying that over and over. And I was like, but still, I was terrified, and I was able to pull myself out of it. And then I'd had another one a few years later where it felt like, oh my God, this is what happens when you die. This feels so good. I feel like my true self without any emotional baggage. And later, as an adult, I tried ecstasy, and it felt exactly like that.
That's wonderful.
It was so weird. And this was when I was a kid before I'd done any drugs or anything.
Hmm. Hmm.
But the thing is, it's like it's usually either kind of like sort of scary and not uh sort of scary and out of control, or I'm sort of floating around and I have a hard time getting my bearings. But sometimes I've had a couple where they're like, have you seen that movie The Nightmare, the documentary?
No.
Oh, you have to watch it. You have to watch it. It's called The
Okay.
Nightmare. It's all anecdotal stuff about people having out of body hypnagogic state, sleep paralysis, out of body
Okay.
experiences. It's totally related to all of our stuff, occultism.
Cool.
But most of the people don't have a clue about occultism, but
Hmm.
you'll watch it and you'll be like, oh, okay. But uh I've had a lot of scary ass ones, where I've seen entities, and you get this sense of existential dread, like a terror. I refer to it as like a spiritual terror. It's so deep that, before I started having these, my mom was, again, science of mind, a white lighter, very positive to a fault, really, like where she wasn't addressing her issues, where she got
Hmm.
issues from her dad and stuff, but
Hmm.
everything was rosy. Brady Bunch, that's stuff we grew up on. Uh, but really a great person, really nice person. Anyway, so I grew up not believing there was evil in the world at all. It was just wasn't a thing. It was
Hmm.
all good. But it's like going into these states, I've encountered these entities that are definitely for sure evil. Like you
Hmm.
feel it.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
the most recent one I had was not long ago. There was I got in that hypnagogic state. There was this the shape of a lump, that was invisible, but I knew where
Hmm.
it was, and it was an old lady's voice cursing at me in, like, I thought Romanian or Russian, and she was
Hmm. Hmm.
pissed. She
Hmm.
was pissed, and she was cursing, like, and I knew she was cursing, although I didn't understand language. She started coming around to my side of the bed, and it was really scary. And I was able to pull myself out of it. And the first thing I thought of when I woke up was Baba Yaga. And then I thought, my rational mind is like, no, you saw Hellboy, you saw the new Hellboy, a year ago, and you're probably thinking Baba Yaga. And so
Uh-huh.
I was just being overly rational about it. Then as I started telling a friend of mine about it and thinking about it, I was like, okay, that was like an Eastern European or Romanian accent, I'm pretty sure, or Russian. And so I looked up Baba Yaga, and that's like, Baba Yaga is from like Eastern Europe. It's an Eastern European myth.
Hmm.
And so it's like that Baba Yaga was like cursing at me in this, and it was, I know it wasn't like a dream. These states are not like a dream. It's different
Right.
than a dream. I've had weird dreams. I've had lucid dreams. And that was one that I just had recently. I don't know why. It was completely random, but I guess the point I'm getting at is, now that you're uh orienting yourself to where Satan is not the god of all these people or these
Right.
entities, what what's the what's the new Satan?
Yeah. Right.
What's the real Satan? What's the real
Hypocrisy. Hypocrisy.
right?
I mean, I was just saying to my partner the other night, I can't tell you the number of times um, that, like, a New Age center, for example, has ripped me off,
Mm,
has committed to paying me for something, taking care of travel, taking care of an expense, and then gone back on its word. I mean, there are places I won't speak anymore because of
mm.
that very thing. And yet these places are all populated with white light people who will talk to you about, like, the environment and global
Right.
warming and spiritual activism, and I hate Trump and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, you can't do anything about any of that stuff, this afternoon at 2 o'clock, but you can certainly pay someone to whom you owe money or something, whatever
Right.
it may be. Or if you say you're going to show up on time to help somebody move or whatever it may be, do so, do so. Or, maybe you're acting out of spite, and you can tell yourself, it's not spite, it's justice, it's goodness, which we're wonderful at.
All right.
Everybody is so wonderful at seeing their perspective as something that's morally necessary in the world. And yet it could be hurting another person, it could be hurting surrounding people. Usually the hallmark of that is the urge, the need, the impulse to tell people what to do. I hear from people either politically or religiously who always tell me, hey man, I'm filled with love and peace. I just want to tell you this one thing. And then if they tell me and I don't sign on to what they're saying, they progressively get angrier and angrier, and their tone changes
Right.
because they don't want to be heard. They want to be heeded. And that's the dividing line. That's the difference. And if you look at our world today, I mean, people will ask me, well, don't you think there are like dark forces in the world? Using the term dark in a certain way that
Hmm.
I don't use it, but I know where they're saying. And I say to them, yes, I'm not trying to be a wise guy, and I'm not trying to be a smartass. Dark forces are somebody sitting in a cubicle with a headset on, with their little nice class pictures or the picture of a rainbow that their kid drew tacked up in the cubicle, denying your healthcare claim,
Right.
denying you coverage that you've paid for,
Right.
that you're entitled to, and that you need. And of course, this goes on all the time. I mean, our health insurance system in this country is set up to deny claims. I mean,
Yeah.
this
Right.
vast edifice is set up to deny claims. And when somebody is sick, they're going through terrible, terrible stress. They haven't got time. And these companies know that people haven't got time
Yeah.
to sit on the
It is.
phone.
It's evil.
It's
It's
evil.
evil.
You're
Yeah.
getting lied to. You're
Yeah.
being forced to resubmit claims, even though the paperwork is there. Every coding procedure is used to invalidate your claim. And so not only are you, the individual, being denied coverage for which you've paid, but you're being put through terrible stress at a time
Right.
when you or somebody that you love is sick. So it seems to me that Hannah Arendt talked about the banality of evil. It
Hmm.
often shows up in episodes of banality, where it's just these everyday things where people feel utterly at liberty to lie, to rip somebody off, to be invasive, to be coercive, to exclude someone, to dehumanize someone. The other day, well, not the other day, it goes way back a bit. I was on a podcast with somebody who he very selectively edited the thing afterwards. He starts coming at me with all this satanic panic stuff.
Oh,
And I
no,
said to him,
really?
yeah, and I said, do you realize that the news coverage that you're coming at me with is literally a generation old? You're coming at me with stuff from 1989, from 1990, that has all been diametrically disproven,
Right.
sometimes by the people who were children who were coerced into making some of these false statements.
That's a good
Sometimes,
example of
yeah,
evil, is the
it's
satanic
a perfect
panic people.
example. And he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Right.
Sometimes by cops who said, shit, I was wrong. I got sold on this bill of goods by this specialist in the occult.
Right.
And, we thought these heavy metal kids were, I mean, Damien Eccles, look what happened to him.
I know.
Look what happened. I have another friend, who was framed for a murder out in the Midwest, spent 10 years in jail. The man's completely innocent. He's now released. But it's like, look at people who think they're enforcing something positive, but are just trying to score a win. And so I'll have somebody coming at me. I mean, the satanic panic, all this fraudulent stuff about abuses committed by daycare workers and your local librarian who wears a pentagram or something.
Yeah, it's pre-QAnon.
I mean, pre-QAnon, and unfortunately coming back through QAnon,
I know.
and down to the granular details, absolutely false. And yet at the same time, there's abuse going on within the Catholic Church, abuse going on within the Boy Scouts of America, not just here, but in Europe as well, all over the world.
Man. It's crazy.
And we're framing, librarians and heavy metal kids and daycare workers who are just trying to get by on a, near minimum wage paycheck. And I've got people now and then who come at me with this stuff, and they seem completely unconcerned that some of the people who actually were some of the primary players in this have come back and said, I am so sorry I fucking did this. This was horrible. Some of the kids, and and this news coverage ain't hard to come by. You just have to be interested.
Right.
And so I guess the point I'm making is that never is so much evil perpetrated by people who are just absolutely convinced that they've got the right idea and they're going to correct something, and they can't fathom the humanity of the person that they're talking to or about. So because they can't, they're persuaded all the more that they can, because they don't experience any gap there. And so you have that, and then you have the banality of people just following different procedures. I mean, I've had organizations that profess to be exponents of expanding human consciousness who take your invoice and it just falls to the bottom of the pile again and again and again. Doesn't matter to them that the individual has groceries to buy, kids to feed, kids to school. They just feel at liberty to not pay their debts. And boy, if you want to drop on something valuable from Abrahamic tradition, there's a line in the Talmud where, well, it's not a line, it's a passage, where a master is asking a group of students, what is evil? And the students all have different answers, and they're very good. But one student says, evil is having a debt and not repaying it. And the master goes, I approve of your words because everybody else's words are enfolded within yours. Think of that broadly defined. What are my debts that I'm not repaying? Think of that on many different levels. And that is what this particular Talmudic dialogue classified as evil. So I've always been, that has always been a kind of a North Star to me.
Yeah. I guess the point I'm making is, or what I'm coming to myself while talking to you about this, because I never classified those evil things in my experiences, those evil feeling things, whatever they are, the entities or whatever. I never connected that to the devil or Satanism. I just never.
Likewise.
It never seemed like. So I ultimately, I guess what you're doing with this, your this brand of Satanism is, it's more like breaking the hierarchical structure more than anything, and viewing, because you're also a practicing magician. You know, I know you've talked about making offerings to like Minerva and different, so it's like, it's more like putting these things on the same level
Yep.
or not having a hierarchical structure. And then what we do with these weird, scary entities are that they are just weird, scary entities on their own that we don't really understand. It's not so much,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's like the internet, I mean, how's it different? I see people go online, they're using pseudonyms, of course, and they, insult other people, ask rhetorical questions. They're sarcastic, they
right.
talk trash constantly and all day, and they get a tremendous charge from this.
Yeah.
And to me, life is physical, life is extra physical. We go into these realms all the time. One may be digital, another may be an
Right.
intersection of time or an extra dimension. And there's beings there that are damned unpleasant. And it may be that the majority of humanity is damned unpleasant. I mean, wars are fought because we want to tell other people what to do, and we want other people's stuff, and it's about that complicated.
Right.
And it doesn't occur to anybody that, well, you could pursue your own conception of happiness without telling another person what to do, or without taking another person's stuff. And the majority of the human race, based upon what's going on any given day, seems not to grok to that. So why would it be different in these other
Right.
intersections of time that we're going to meet entities
Right.
that are profoundly unpleasant and
Yeah, makes sense.
may
Makes
threaten
sense.
us,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
It's always been though, the message to me has always been they can't hurt you. They can just
yeah,
scare you. It's always that. Like I know
yeah.
they can't, but you still feel the fear. So
Well,
it's
there's a certain meaningful risk also that one has to take. I think I read somewhere that the readership, I think this is in uncertain places, the readership that I serve is authentically searching and willing to take meaningful risks, because I've had,
right, right.
I remember, as I began to embark on my own conception of the satanic, I thought to myself, I'm not going to dismiss and brush off the concerns of a whole swath of humanity. Maybe I am wrong, but
Right.
I have embarked upon this. I am diving into the deep end of the pool, and I am willing to shoulder that. I am willing to
Right.
shoulder that. I am prepared to take that risk for my search. That's a decision that I have no right to make for anybody else, but that I made.
Yeah. And that's the thing. That ends up maybe that's the purpose of that adversarial thing, or
Mm-hmm.
making that claim. And even just making that, I had one time I had a trip vision, and this is still in the hierarchical sort of God framework, but it was like I saw this. It was all cartoony too. It was really weird, but I saw this castle, like a creepy castle, with a bunch of lightning coming. Like it was like there was light flashing behind the castle, and it was all kind of purples and dark blues. And I had this thought that the light is God, and the castle has a bunch of monsters out front, which
Mm-hmm.
are demons, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And the demons are there to uh, scare the people off who don't have the courage to try to get to God. Like if you don't have the courage, or you don't have the whatever to go all the way, you don't you don't get to see God. You don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you haven't earned it if you're not
Mm-hmm.
willing to fight to face the demons that are there. They're there
Mm-hmm.
for that reason. They're not like a separate thing from God. They are God's thing, put there to keep out people who aren't ready to experience God.
And
You
I
know what
would
I
add
mean?
to that, yeah, of course. And I would add to that in Genesis 3, the serpent in the garden, who is, you know, centuries after the fact, conflated with the satanic, but I think as part of the human parable, I'm accepting of that. And the serpent in the garden tells Eve the truth.
Right. Yeah.
You've been placed into this, lovely little aquarium here where all your needs are taken care of.
He was right.
Right. Exactly. And there's this tree in the garden, tree of knowledge of good and evil, which may be the same tree as the tree of
Right.
life. It's a very interesting thing that some biblical scholars debate.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been told you can taste from every tree in the garden except the one that will give you the capacity for measurement, except the one that will give you the capacity for self-knowledge, for inner reflection, for construction and creativity, and eat from it. You're not going to die. You'll actually gain awareness. Eve eats from it without coercion. Adam eats from it, and they're expelled from the garden. And friction is brought into their lives. But how would we have creativity without friction? How would we have creativity without pathos? Humanity wouldn't be itself. It wouldn't be worthy of its name had it not been for the expulsion from the garden. So I look at that parable very, very differently. And that, in many ways, was the beginning of this leg of my journey.
Yeah, it's like, graduating from animals to humans, human higher thought. It seems like
we weren't really human. If you abide by the terms of that parable, there was a sameness.
Right.
How were we human? If we didn't have to till the land, if there was no pain in birth, if there was no pain in the act of generation, if there was no metallurgy, if there was no nothing, there's one kind of fallen archangel in scripture who's maybe it's the name is suddenly escaping me. Enoch, who's said to have taught metallurgy, to humanity. Well, you can make weapons, you can make jewelry, you can make any number of things, and friction and choice are the human situation. And without friction, there would not be creativity, nor would there be necessity. Again, opposition is true friendship. Humanity would not be itself without the expulsion.
Yeah. So it's on. So your form of Satanism is honoring that force.
Exactly.
With without we wouldn't be shit.
Exactly.
We just be animals. We wouldn't be thinking. Yeah.
Right.
So,
kept animals.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I love that in the book. Whenever you say that, it's like, the snake was right on all counts. He was like, right. Everything he said was true. How is that bad?
That's my perspective. And these things work their way into the parable, of the human story. I mean, one could debate what truth is being shown to us here, what's being exposed to us here. It doesn't mean that I reject scripture. I go into scripture and I say, I have a reading of this. I have a reading of the Bhagavad Gita. I have a reading of the Tao Te Ching. I have a reading of the Dhammapada. This is part of the human story that we set down, and the individual has to navigate through that story in a mature way.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay. I'm gonna be respectful of your time and let you go now, but because I know it's getting to 2 hours now, but hopefully you'll come back on again if you have.
Delighted, man. Absolutely.
You've always got an open invitation.
I totally dig it. Thank you.
Let me know when your next book comes out, because I'd love to have you on to promote it.
Absolutely.
And any other time too. But don't hang up after I end the call or after I end the recording, because I have to ask you something. And then
Deal.
And then the final thing we do at this podcast is we say goodbye to the audience at the end. So just say goodbye, audience. So,
be happy to.
Okay, there you go. Say goodbye, audience.
Goodbye, audience. Okay. Oh, are we there?
We are there.
Goodbye, audience. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's a terrible.
I thought I was prepping. So don't forget that. So
no, this is all part of the podcast.
Yeah. I appreciate it. I mean, really, this conversation flew by.
Yeah.
The time flew by, and we'll talk next time about how there is no time. And we can expand on that. But I loved it. I really loved it.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Okay, we're gonna say, okay, let's do it now. Goodbye, audience.
Goodbye, audience.